Isa sa mga pinakakilalang problema ng bansang Pilipinas ay ang problema ng korupsyon. Ang korupsyon ay sobrang tagal ng usapan ng mga Pilipino. Kung ito man ay manggaling sa mismong bahay, sa usapan ng iyong magkakapatid o ng iyong magulang kasama mo, o kaya ang usapan na ito ay sa paaralan, sa palengke, o di kaya sa eleksyon. Ang korupsyon ay nananatiling isang malaking multo sa buhay natin. At given na nalaman natin ang isang napakalaking corruption scandal na nakakonekta sa ating flood control system, nakikita natin ang pangailangan upang baguhin kung sino ba ang mga namumuno, sino ang humahawak ng pera, at sino ang pinapayagang bigyan ng pera ito. Sino ang pinapayagang gumawa ng mga proyektong dapat bumabalik sa atin. Nakikita natin noong September 21, ang isang malaking protesta sa buong bansa. Dito, pinalitan ng mga tao ang baha sa kalsada bilang sila mismo ang bumaha dito upang ipagpanawagan ang maayos na pamamahala sa bansa. Ngunit ang isang kailangan natin pansinin dito, ay meron bang nagbago after the September 21? Isang buwan lang nakalipas, nandito pa rin tayo, galit, naghahanap ng solusyon, naghahanap ng kakampi, at naghahanap ng hustisya. Nakikita natin after ng September 21, wala pa rin mga politiko at wala pa rin mga contractor ang napapanagot. Wala pa rin ang napapabilanggo. Ngunit ang nangyayari ay isa-isang hinahanap ang mga taong naglalahad ng katotohanan tungkol sa laban sa korupsyon na ito. Nakikita natin ang higwan o ang kontradiksyon sa pagitan ng taong bayan, ng gobyerno, at ng kanilang mga kroni. Marahil ang isang malaking tanong para sa atin ngayong lahat sa hapon na ito ay pagkatapos ng September 21, mananatili pa rin ba ang korupsyon sa Pilipinas? At kung mananatili ang korupsyon sa Pilipinas, meron ba itong hangganan? Kung meron itong hangganan, or kung wala itong hangganan, kailan ito matatapos? At maliban sa tanong kung kailan ito may matatapos, paano ba natin ito tatapusin? At yun ang mahalagang kwento natin para sa hapon na ito. So, ladies and gentlemen, and for those who do not recognize yourselves as ladies or gentlemen, welcome sa ating public lecture for today titled Anticorruption Campaigns, Regime Change, and Proprietary Polity in the Philippine Case. This is organized by the UP Third World Study Center in collaboration with the Sarilaya Development Workers Chapter. So, itong public lecture na ito sa hapon na ito ay hindi mangyayari without the help of Sarilaya as well with our esteemed lecturer na papakilala natin later on. Ayan. So, I hope marami tayong mga tanong for today and I hope very interested tayo kaya tayo nandito. So, right now, pakilala natin ang ating lecturer to begin our discussion. So, our lecturer is the convener of the Political Economy Program of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies and president of the Asia-Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation, Incorporated. She earned both her PhD and MA in Political Science from the City University of New York Graduate Center and taught Southeast Asian and Philippine Development Studies at the UP Diliman Asian Center. Specializing in the political economy of late development, her research interests cover governance and development politics, comparative political institutions, globalization and international political economy, and as well as identity politics and conflict studies. Ladies and gentlemen, may we welcome Dr. Antoinette Raquiza for her lecture.
Magandang hapon sa lahat. Thank you, Jules, for the introduction. And I would also like to thank the Third World Study Center and the Sarilaya Development Workers Chapter for organizing this activity and giving me a chance or the opportunity to discuss with you a study that I did in 2019, but unfortunately still seems to be relevant today. I would also like to greet and thank my colleagues in political science, Professor Emeritus Encarnacion Tadem and Professor Dominic Caouette, and of course, Malaluan, sorry, no, sorry, Malaluan, who, as convener of the Right to Know Right Now Center, needs no explanation of why he is actually here. So let me begin. The Philippines today seems to be once again heading toward a political crisis. The damning revelations on how billions of taxpayers' money have been siphoned into officials and their contractors' pockets through the national budgeting process have raised grand corruption in the country to a whole new level and triggered spontaneous and organized indignation rallies that have grown in size and frequency, bringing out into the parliament of the streets a diversity of political and civic groups, and in fact, a whole new generation. The political drama that is unfolding today seems to follow a pattern of regime change, in which political turmoils that begins with corruption scandals ends in the downfall of a high government official or political transfer of political power or both. In the Philippine case, the causal mechanism linking corruption and regime change, which I will narrowly define here as a change in the political leadership, consists of the combination of four elements. One, media exposés, street mobilizations, parliamentary forms of contestation, election and impeachment particularly, and fourth, military action. The four emerged with the ouster of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in 1986, specifically during the heavy days of February 21 to 25, leading up to what has come to be known as EDSA uprising. The emergent roadmap of regime change was successfully replicated in 2001 with the ouster of President Joseph Estrada, or what we have come to know as EDSA-2. As expected, the current conjuncture is rife with speculations on where the latest iteration of the EDSA roadmap will lead. What are the chances that today's street protests will lead to regime change? My talk this afternoon seeks to contribute to answering this question by discussing the findings of a comparative study that I did in 2019 as part of the volume entitled The Political Logics of Anti-Corruption Efforts in Asia. The study compared two high-powered anti-corruption campaigns, first against Estrada and then against his successor, President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. Each followed more or less the same EDSA playbook, but only one led to regime change. The mobilizations against Macapagal-Arroyo not only failed to oust her, but also to constrain corruption in high places. What accounts for the different outcomes? My study will argues that understanding the nature, strengths, and prospects of national anti-corruption campaigns requires that one examines the country's specific configuration of state power, which I have characterized in other studies as proprietary polity. The concept of proprietary polity stresses the social foundations of political power. It shares the view of elite rule with previous studies such as Benedict Anderson's framework of classical democracy and Paul Hutchcroft's oligarchic patrimonialism, in that it shows that elite rule merges class power and public office. The proprietary polity concept, however, also examines the deep cleavages among political elites. In the Philippines, a political leadership rise to national power reflects their family's social status and wealth, while most technocrats appointed to head government agencies and constitutional bodies come from the political leadership's social and political networks. This configuration has implications on anti-corruption campaigns, given that political and technocratic power is highly personalistic. Anti-corruption campaigns are more effective in removing top-ranking government officials than setting up institutional measures to promote accountability and transparency, conditions that would help constrain abuse of power in the long run. More to the point, using the proprietary polity lenses, the findings from the comparative study will show that the differences in outcome may be traced to two immediate factors. One, whether there is a clear line of succession that is acceptable to the leaders of the broad anti-corruption campaign or forces. And two, which faction of the fractious political elites commands the traditional channels of patronage in the lower house that has the sole power to initiate proceedings and endorse impeachment complaints. In this sense, institutional settings mediate the interaction between class and patronal networks that in turn structures the exercise of political power, like the power to impeach or take down elected officials. My talk is organized into three parts. I will situate the nature of anti-corruption campaigns in a specific state configuration and then provide a detailed account of the anti-corruption campaigns against the two heads of state to illustrate how. Then I will discuss the emerging patterns of interaction between political contestation and anti-corruption campaigns in a proprietary polity before providing some recommendations. It is my hope that by discussing the Philippine experience in anti-corruption campaigns, specifically the findings from my comparative study, we can draw lessons that would help inform our analysis and political action in the current and future campaigns. To better understand the potency and limitations of high-stake anti-corruption campaigns, it helps to examine the institutional settings from which they arise. Perhaps nowhere is this more true than in the Philippines, where political leaders gain national power based on the personal and family wealth and social networks, rather than from their membership in robust political parties or state institutions. In the country's proprietary polity, the merging of class and political power usually happens at the level of the family, where members branch out into business and politics, as, of course, the study of Almacoy would say. As such, the basic unit of rent generation in the country has been the political family. Political leaders further consolidate their hold onto power by appointing people from inside their social networks to head government agencies. This state configuration shapes anti-corruption campaigns. First, where state institutions are weak and political power often centers around individuals, anti-corruption campaigns will focus almost exclusively on individual politicians and will work to reinforce personalistic politics. Second, that the technocrats lack critical distance from the political leadership makes them vulnerable to partisan politics. To illustrate the proprietary polity framework, I will now discuss the anti-corruption campaigns against Estrada and Macapagal Arroyo and their aftermath. So I will discuss each in 3 paragraphs. So please bear with me if I give you some of the details. The Estrada case study focuses on the period starting in 1999, when scandals first hit the news, and ending in 2001 with the forced resignation, arrest, and detention of Estrada. The Macapagal Arroyo case study centers on the period beginning almost as soon as she took over from Estrada in 2001 until 2005 and 2007, when the anti-corruption movement exploded, then immediately lost steam. The two campaigns were more or less similar in terms of mobilizing issues and the political figures and forces at the forefront of the struggle. The successful campaign against Estrada took 3 years. During this period, national media would run one expose after another, starting with in 1999, starting with a textbook an anomalous textbook deal that was linked to a relative and a cabinet member. I'm saying this mainly because it's an important note. It was not, so national media would run one expose after another, but it would not be until September 2000 when a provincial governor publicly accused Estrada of having received a cut of revenues from Caouette and the tobacco excise taxes, that the anti-corruption campaign came to a head. On September 21, the anniversary of Marcos Sr.'s declaration of martial law, the protest movement led by the left political organizations staged rallies in Metro Manila and other urban centers. In October, EDSA One figures, notably former President Corazon Aquino, the Manila Archbishop Jaime Cardinal Sin, as well as the Catholic Bishop Business Conference and the Makati Business Club, mobilized for the movement. During this time, the parliament and legal processes also kicked in. An impeachment complaint was filed at the House of Representatives on October 12, 2002, and in less than a month, the House voted to endorse the articles of impeachment against Estrada. The case then moved to the Senate, but just a month into the impeachment trial, the broad opposition accused the Senate, which at that time was dominated by Estrada, of withholding vital evidence. And on January 18, 2001, called on the public to go to EDSA and demand Estrada's resignation. The next day, Armed Forces of the Philippines Chief of Staff Herrera and PNP Director General Panfilo Lacson withdrew their support from the president and joined the demonstration. At noon on January 20, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was sworn into office by the Supreme Court Chief Justice. 2 hours later, Estrada left the presidential palace, was arrested in 2001, and found guilty of plunder at the Santiago. The anti-corruption campaign against Macapagal Arroyo took almost 6 years to gain momentum and present a credible challenge to her rule, even as her term had been marred by a string of scandals, and these included in 2001 the reported misuse of the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office, or PCSO funds, for the ruling People Party coalition campaign for the midterm general elections. Then you will also have news on 2002 onward, multi-billion peso infrastructure contracts allegedly involving foreign corporations and the First Family. Nevertheless, neither these scandals nor the coup attempt in July 2003 by a faction of the military popularly known as the Magdalo soldiers led to a crisis of governance for the administration that the EDSA forces put into office. In fact, Macapagal Arroyo and the ruling coalition went on to win the 2004 national elections. Despite the charges that the ruling party had committed massive electoral fraud in the 2004 elections, The anti-corruption movement saw its ranks swell and gather momentum toward an EDSA scenario only a year after, with the release of the wiretap phone conversation between Macapagal Arroyo and the Commission on Elections chair, discussing the May 2004 elections in a 1 million vote margin. The period 2005 to 2007 saw a flurry of protest activities. I'm sure some of you will remember this, punctuated by key events in 2005. 10 department secretaries resigned from the cabinet. Subsequently, Makati Business Club and other business leaders called for Macapagal Arroyo's resignation. In a broad multi-sectoral coalition, the Puklura para sa Katotohanan formed to unite EDSA-2's forces, and the opposition identified with Estrada was formed. During this period, the House of Representatives received and rejected almost immediately 11 impeachment complaints against Macapagal Arroyo. Equally significant were the 2 failed military coup attempts in February 2006 and November 2007 by the Magdalo soldiers. By 2008, Macapagal Arroyo had weathered the political storm, allowing her to complete her term. Why did graft and corruption issues work to unseat Estrada, but not Macapagal Arroyo? A close comparison of the 2 campaigns revealed that despite an aggressive media campaign, growing street mobilizations, active support of the Catholic Church and big business, and potentially game-changing military action, it was the parliamentary and legal arena that set the pace and direction of the anti-corruption campaigns. In this regard, 2 variables matter. 1, whether there was a clear line of succession and thus an undisputed challenger to the incumbent. And 2, which party dominated in the House of Representatives, the body that would vote for or vote down the impeachment complaints. With regard to the first variable, the anti-corruption struggles against Estrada and Macapagal Arroyo had put into sharp focus the political significance of the vice presidency. Prior to the anti-Estrada campaign, the institutional arrangement where you have the president and the vice president being directly elected and thus may belong to different political parties, this did not result in any power struggle between the country's 2 top leaders. Those elected to the vice presidency basically waited for their turn to vie for the top spot while accepting any cabinet post offered to them to stay relevant. With EDSA-2, Vice President Macapagal Arroyo became the de facto rallying figure of the broad anti-corruption campaign or movement. As Vice President to Estrada, she worked to minimize competition among the different groups in the anti-corruption movement. And having a clear path to succession also removed the uncertainty of an extra-parliamentary political transition. In contrast, the broad anti-corruption movement against Macapagal Arroyo lacked a rallying figure, mainly because the 2 vice presidents during her extended term belonged to the ruling coalition that she led. In this context, the broad anti-corruption movement divided on alternatives. Big business opted for the constitutional process of succession, opposition political parties called for snap elections, and the different left political movements agitated for more militant extra-parliamentary actions. The second factor that distinguished the 2 campaigns was the role that partisan politics played in the impeachment cases. The speed with which the House of Representatives dispensed with the impeachment complaints was revealing. It took only a little over a month for the lower house to deliberate and endorse Estrada's impeachment. The 11 complaints filed against Macapagal Arroyo were dealt with just as quickly. It took nearly a month or so for the Lakas-dominated House of Representatives to approve the impeachment complaint against Estrada and reject those against Macapagal-Arroyo. The speed in which complaints against a sitting president was decided suggests that politics rather than justice drove the trials. This in turn can be explained by the balance of power in Congress. During those periods, in the 1998 elections, Estrada's popularity with the masses helped win the day for him, but not his party, the fledgling Partido ng Masa Pilipino, while Macapagal-Arroyo, who ran under the outgoing President Miguel Ramos' political party, Lakas, inherited the established campaign machinery that had dominated the 1998 congressional elections. Significantly, the first expose against Estrada, which was the 200 million textbook deal, broke when his administration was investigating the overpriced Centennial Expo Filipino project in Clark Air Base, allegedly linked to the Ramos administration and Lakas fundraising efforts for the 1998 election. After EDSA II, when the opposition filed impeachment cases against Macapagal-Arroyo based on alleged illegal use of the PCSO in 2001 and the Gintong Ani funds 2004 to ensure the ruling party's electoral victory, it had to contend with a lower house being dominated by those who likely benefited from such illegal fundraising activities. In fact, the pursuit of corrupt government officials followed party lines that hewed closely to patronal networks of national politicians, especially those linked to the administration. For instance, in investigating a series of pork barrel scams in 2013, in which government officials had channeled millions of pesos of government funds to bogus non-governmental organizations, the Ombudsman focused on three leading opposition figures. That emphasis raised questions regarding the Ombudsman's impartiality in light of allegations that members of the ruling Liberal Party were culpable as well. Trends since 2000 have shown that justice has been selective and reinforcing the personalistic nature of anti-corruption campaigns. Specifically, impeachment has provided a way to replace high-ranking individuals without having to wait for the end of their constitutionally prescribed terms of office. Since EDSA II, ruling political elites who sought to impeach Supreme Court justices and the Ombudsman in charge of the prosecution of anti-corruption cases at the Sandigan usually take into account who appointed the presiding judge. Under Aquino III, impeachment cases were filed against Macapagal-Arroyo's appointees, Ombudsman Merceditas Gutierrez and Supreme Court Chief Justice Renato Corona. Since the Corona case has set yet another precedent, it deserves a closer reading. In this case, the deliberation and decision-making in the lower house took only 1 day. 1 day. On December 12, 2011, the House received and endorsed the articles of impeachment against the Chief Justice. After 3 months of deliberation, 20 senator judges convicted Corona largely on the basis of the Saled misdeclaration. That said, 3 points need to be factored into what the Aquino administration hailed as a win against corruption. First, the main protagonists were a president whose 6,453 hectare family estate was about to be distributed to its tenant farmers under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, as approved by the Supreme Court and a Chief Justice who shepherded this landmark ruling through just 2 weeks before impeachment proceedings against him began. Second, as reported in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, the Aquino administration distributed funds from its Disbursement Acceleration Program, the DAP, giving members of the lower house 5 billion and senators about 1.5 billion for their pet projects before and after the impeachment proceedings. Again, this was reported in Inquirer. Third, note, these transactions took place under a president who ran under a walang mahirap kung walang corrupt campaign. Corona's impeachment allowed Aquino to appoint a Chief Justice. He did so by elevating to the post one of his appointees with a high bench, Maria Lourdes Sereno. While Sereno's appointment was hailed or celebrated as she became the country's first woman Chief Justice, not a few noted that she was also among those who dissented from the Supreme Court majority giving the Cojuangco family-owned Hacienda Luisita a land compensation package of 304.03 million pesos. In 2025, the issue of land valuation was finally resolved, with the Court of Appeals ordering the Land Bank and DAR to pay Hacienda Luisita 28.48 billion pesos as compensation. So needless to say, with the election then of President Rodrigo Duterte, Sereno was also summarily removed, basically for being an Aquino appointee. It has been argued that the ouster of Estrada in 2001 is a testament to the critical role anti-corruption campaigns can play in bringing about more accountable leadership in the Philippines. In fact, the successful anti-corruption campaign in 2001 has been likened to the 1986 People Power Revolution today, more commonly known as EDSA 1. Yet latter-day EDSA inspired movements, including the anti-corruption campaign against Macapagal Arroyo, have differed from the prototype in a fundamental way. EDSA 1 led to a change in the form of rule, while EDSA 2's main accomplishment was Estrada's replacement. The difference may be partly explained by the fact that the anti-corruption campaign that contributed to Marcos Sr.'s ouster was crafted on a 14-year struggle to end authoritarian rule. Moreover, because power is highly centralized in a dictatorship, even a personalistic campaign focused on unseating the incumbent can shake the foundation of this form of rule. In contrast, an anti-corruption campaign aimed at ousting an incumbent today can work within the logic of a well-established elite democracy. Such campaigns are akin to surgical strikes aimed at neutralizing political figures while deflecting attention to the need to reform the political system in which corruption operates. This would explain why anti-corruption campaigns are relatively easy to transform into electoral vehicles for oligarchs, whose families likely came into wealth by gaming the system early on, and who are thus equally vested in money politics. So I'm in my. The anti-corruption campaign or literature has yet to fully address the disconnect between anti-corruption initiatives and their outcomes. In fact, it would seem that much of the World Bank's good governance agenda is influenced by the structural functional approach, which focuses on drawing up ways to make formal organizations and administrative processes more accountable and transparent. Where this approach fails, say in cases of state capture, a default setting has been to recommend government downsizing to minimize opportunities for corruption. Such an approach, however, cannot explain how EDSA DOS could produce an administration that would come to be accused of being more corrupt than the last. In keeping with how she came to power, Macapagal Arroyo set up various anti-corruption bodies, such as the Government Civil Society Governance Advisory Council. Her track record, however, was no different from those who came before her and will come after her. For its part, the social movement literature provides us with analytical tools to understand the ebbs and flows of anti-corruption campaigns. And here I draw attention to three elements that they focus on: organized forces, a mass phenomenon, and an innate political environment. While the anti-corruption campaign, unfortunately, it does not fully explain the divergent outcomes of similarly inspired protests. While the anti-corruption campaigns against Estrada and Macapagal Arroyo were patterned after EDSA 1, the comparative analysis reveals that in both cases, it was traditional politics rather than social movement dynamics that prevailed. The present study thus suggests that Estrada proved a much easier target because he was an outsider. That is, he did not command established lines of patronage in the lower house. As anti-corruption activists channel campaigns more and more toward the parliamentary arena, these campaigns are more easily co-opted by the ruling elites. Unfortunately, narrow anti-corruption campaigns that are not linked to a comprehensive critique of the system will only further personalistic rule, especially those whom the campaign stands to benefit. As EDSA DOS and its aftermath shows, in their haste to remove erring individuals, Congress took shortcuts in legal procedures, all of which weaken institutions previously established to promote rule of law and check abuse of power. Thus, since EDSA DOS, the Philippines has witnessed discretionary executive power grow under the guise of ridding government of corruption. What does this pattern say to movement activists? Just as proprietary polity raises distinct analytical puzzles for researchers, it also has implications for anti-corruption activist consideration. Based on the Philippine experience so far, with anti-corruption campaigns targeting individuals, regime change is possible with minimal cost to oligarchic rule. Targeting erring officials, especially those located at the pinnacle of power, has been effective in building broad coalitions between the left and the right, and between progressive movements and conservative forces. Nevertheless, such coalitions also tend to minimize more structural issues that contribute to poverty and corruption. In this connection, the impeachment, again, of Supreme Court Chief Justice Corona in 2011 stands as a quintessential case of an anti-corruption campaign that sends mixed signals. His fate serves as a cautionary tale for justices who, like perhaps almost everyone in the system, have unexplained wealth, but also, let me start. His fate serves as a cautionary tale for justices who, like perhaps almost everybody else in the system, have unexplained wealth, but who also, for whatever reason, would rule in favor of landless farmers against landed elites or politicians. In this light, movement activists with a broad reform agenda need to be aware of the trade-offs of carrying out a narrowly considered single-issue campaign. Anti-corruption campaigns have natural constituencies among members of the middle and upper classes worried about waste and inefficiencies and extra economic burdens on business activities. For this reason, they easily provide opportunities for broad and multi-class mobilizations that can put movement actors in alliance with big business and traditional politicians. This very broadness, however, is anchored on activists accepting partners with essentially conservative outlooks and interests. As such, working in coalitions to be more effective can also pull activists away from progressive politics and from supporting members of their base who depend on movement work to change the material conditions of their lives. Indeed, from a proprietary polity perspective, what would need to happen is to curb corruption in high places, to establish institutional constraints on executive power at different levels of governance. In this light, there is a need to set up enduring alliances that would push for institutional reforms, including the building of strong, independent, pro-poor political parties. So let me just go. So these are just some of the recommendations that I just put it out there. One is to anchor anti-corruption campaigns as part of a comprehensive critique of oligarchic democracy. Two, to work for concrete changes in the system. For instance, looking at the national budgeting process, the court panel system, and not just on personalities. Third, strengthen civil service rules designed to promote bureaucracy's independence. Again, for instance, promoting meritocratic appointments of heads of government agencies. Four, pursue and sustain a non-partisan advocacy for reforms to strengthen the electoral and party system, which would include campaign finance reform, vote counting procedures, election monitoring procedures, so on and so forth. And lastly, transform elections as a platform for pro-poor advocacies. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat po, Meredith. So, perhaps yung isa sa mga bagay na kailangan nating harapin is yung idea na meron tayong mga nagawa ng tama, ngunit ano pa ba yung kailangan pa natin itama para sa mga susunod pa. At itong diskusyon na ito, mas pinapakita niya lamang kung ano ba yung mga pagkulang natin sa mismong analysis natin, kung paano ba dapat natin ginagawa ang mga pagkilos na ito. Ano yung pagkukulang natin? Sapat lang ba sabihin natin online na yung mga kurakot dapat makulong? Diba? Or sapat na ba na yung paglabas sa kalsada dahil nakita natin, historically, kapag lumalabas sa mga tao sa kalsada, may napapagkasin. However, the need that we have to recognize, given natin sa lecture ni Ma'am Antoinette ay, paano ba natin tinitingnan yung mismong sistema na meron tayo? Paano ba natin tinitingnan yung full set ng actors na meron tayo sa politika? At gain din, paano ba natin tinitingnan actually kung ano ba yung demokrasya natin at this very moment? Ayan. So para mas bigyan ng pagpapalawig yung mga konsepto na ito, makapag-raise ng ilang mga kasagutan sa probably mga tanong na gusto ko nang itanong, or makapag-raise pa ng mga tanong na kailangan natin matanong at kailangan natin masagot. We will be calling on a few reactors for this afternoon. At una sa ating mga reactor ay we will call on Professor Dominic Caouette from the Department of Political Science, University de Montreal.
Magandang hapon sa inyo lahat. Nagagalak ko to be here because I've been coming to UP and I've been working with PwC for many years. So I'd like to take a moment to thank PwC for organizing such interesting panels and also to ask me to be part of it. I also like to acknowledge and thank Sarilaya for organizing the event. I've been a Sarilaya member, I think we're saying more than 15 years ago. So it's a time to meet. Also, isip ko, I was asked to be a reactor. So a reactor is to generate reaction. It's a logical invitation. So I hope that I'll be able to create some reaction in terms of question that may be asked to Antoinette and reflection. So I'd like also to say that it's very appropriate to do a talk like this at UP. UP has been at the forefront of lots of the social movements. Students play key roles in social mobilization. In 2012 in Quebec, it's a different case where I'm from, it was a student that led a large protest around tuition hike, but that was following some scandal of corruption. That generated support from different generation of activists, of different generation of parents were walking, grandparents were walking, but it started with students. And if now we talk about the Gen Z, all of a sudden people who were skeptical saying, students now are Gen Z, they're self-centered, etc. They think about social media. They have been at the front of lots of mobilization, whether we think of Indonesia, Nepal, Bangladesh 2 years ago. So it's quite appropriate that the talk be held here at UP with a long tradition of student activity. The other importance too is UP has been a center of thinking. So it's great to be active, but you need also time to think and reflect. And I think the paper offers such a possibility to learn from past cases so that you can see what might be target and what can be possible explanations. So I invite you to take time to read the chapter itself. The chapter is very, very well done. It's a first, if you're doing political science courses on comparative politics, this is a model. You do two cases, you have contrast cases, you try to explain, you have a framework. I think it's very interesting to read the paper. I really enjoyed it and I learned from it. I think the comparison between Estrada and Pitsados and the mobilization and the capacity of Macapagal to withstand the opposition and the through 6 years of anti-corruption campaign is very interesting. It's also that when you look at cases, you need the theory. And what I like in the paper is that before proposing proprietary our own theory, our own approach for proprietary politics, Antoinette looks at different models that can be used. First, the idea of a public choice. The idea of public choice theory would say in the Philippines, because you have a six years mandate, but it cannot be renewed, you can make a lot of changes because you know that they have 6 years to do it and that you won't be able to do it after, so you may take some risks. So, but that would not explain continuity over time, which is what Antoinette is pointing out. The elite, the family, patrimonial state is ongoing. The other possibility was what Tadem mentioned, the structural functional approach, that if you have corruption, one response is to modify the bureaucracy and then make it more accountable. Third one is civil society and contentious politics, whereas you lead a campaign and it can lead to change because you have social mobilization, but it seems from the case we've looked at, you need specific conditions. You need media, parliamentary, legal speech protest, and also some form of alliance with the political elite and even some military, as we saw during ETSA 1 and ETSA 2. This seems to work for certain cases, but do not work for example, the Macapagal case. And I would argue it's also these three approaches will have a problem explaining what's happening now with the anti-corruption campaign being launched. And there are some characteristics that this will be part of my reaction, my role as reactor to make you react, is what is different in the current situation and the current context. So I think the idea behind the approach of the idea of proprietary policy is very much in line with classical democracy from Ben Anderson, also Paul Ashcroft, who has looked at patrimonial oligarchy, which is a mix of Gramscian Marxist with also cultural studies. So it says four things. Political leadership is able to make numerous appointments of high officials in national agencies. So the capacity of the president upon election to nominate key individual in key agency gives them a lot of power and a lot of power of influence over how things are made. The second one, that bureaucracy becomes vulnerable to political influence. And for this, I let Tessa talk about the difference between a bureaucrat and technocrats. In many ways, some are arguing that if there would be less appointment, but those who would be heading national agencies would be technocrats that are not politicized or lesser politicized, you would have better outcome. Some people have said if you pay better civil servant, there'll be less temptation to be part of corruption networks. So that's a second point. The third point is in this model of proprietary politics, it's hard to say, proprietary politics, you also, there's a meeting of class and political powers together at the level of the family. So the expression, it's all in the family, remains true largely in the Philippines, and we see it with those who are elected. So in a way, if you want, the system is made that if you want to generate rent, you go to a political family. That's a way to ensure rent-seeking behavior in the Philippines. So what I think it's key, and this is maybe more related to what is happening now, is what type of interaction should we be looking at? What are the clues we should be looking at in understanding what's going on? In the past, there was deep villages and split existed among state elites that were linked to different family clans that were fighting for power. But it remained, it was within the family dynamic that was there, but it was also these families were able to embed themselves through appointment inside the bureaucracy. So that system has been in place, and in a way, this explanation offers a long-term perspective on different regimes. There are three insights that are drawn from this approach. The first time it was mentioned also by Antoinette is the lack of competing political parties. Although for Herrera, Lacas seems to be in a role that is seen as a party, but these are not long-term existing party, or they never, you don't have a system where parties are established and there's a line for a fixed program. The second thing is the crossover from being within the family to have access to the bureaucracy. So the political appointment is the third element. And the third one, which makes so far the type of anti-corruption campaign we have, is that it tended to lead on the individual rather than the system. And I think that's what is important. Oftentimes, and it's part of Filipino politics, but also it does more media coverage. As you look at the Vizcaya, then so many cars, so much money. You have a table with full of cash. You have the individual, then you say, this is the individual. So corruption becomes embodied in person, and that's how people start reacting. The problem is that if they are able to embody it in person, there's a system that allows it to happen, and that's oftentimes gets left out. And so you have change of person, but the methods of work remain the same. So I would say the framework is proposed by Antoinette in many ways identify what are the key elements to look at, the three also what are the problems associated with the system. So what does it tell us on the current situation? And this is where I would have a series of questions. Today, differently from the cases, President Bongbong Marcos doesn't seem to be the target of the anti-corruption campaign. In fact, the target are legislators, senator, congresswoman, congressman, contractor, and political official, public official. So it's quite different when you have Herrera, that was a key figure. You have Marcos Sr. before, or you have Macapagal. Now, Bongbong Marcos appears to be on the offensive. He's the one with the State of the Nation address that calls it. He says, you should be ashamed. And he captured the discourse, where in fact, it's quite ironic that the son of President Marcos, who was Cacique number one, or number one, is now saying that if I were a citizen, I would be in the street walking also. With you, he has captured the discourse, and this is I think, a key challenge. He was able to be elected also in changing history, remaking history in part by social media. So this is a different dynamic that we did not have before. So I'd be curious to hear about. The third idea is before, in cases of anti-graft corruption, there was a scenario. You would replace a person, you replace Herrera by oftentimes the vice president, or you replace Macapagal by his vice president. In the current situation, no one talks about having Sara Duterte coming back, except those who are DDS at the lower form. But if you look on September 21 mobilization, the Duterte group was quite a minority. So what do you do when you don't have a replacement or a person in a personalized system which is highly personalized, which is not there? So what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of thinking of the success or not of this anti-corruption mobilization? The fourth element, people used to say that, and mentioned that ETSA 1 was through radio, traditional mobilization, people word of mouth, the traditional media, Cardinal saying get onto ETSA. ETSA 2 was a textual mobilization. I remember seeing in Canada reading that the ETSA 2 was the success of the texting mobilization. Now we're talking about netizen, the netizen activism. Can this netizen activism lead to sustained mobilization? Because it's more individualized. So what does it mean in terms of today? And I have 2 minutes left and 2 questions. 2.5 questions with negotiation. What can one make about the Sara Duterte factor that is herself accused of mass corruption? Rodrigo Duterte is now being tried in ICC away from the Philippines. What is the current balance of power? Because you're thinking you have to pay attention to current balance of power. But what's your reading of the current balance of power? And also, what do you see? What are the potentiality in the current campaign? What are the elements missing that you see that are maybe not taken into account? And the last one is, for your next book chapter or article, is this a new case? Is it going to be a new case, a third case, which is different than Macapagal and Herrera? Is there something very specific to the law, or is it a continuity with different configuration? Thank you.
Okay, those are actually very interesting questions. Bilang tao, marami din tanong. I like how Dominic emphasized on the idea that this current case that we have right now is actually very different from the one that we had before. It's different from ETSA 1, it's different from ETSA 2, it's different from the anti-corruption campaigns during GMA. We know that what's happening right now is an anti-corruption campaign, but do we think that the same circumstances that we had during the previous anti-corruption campaigns of before are the same today? Kasi most probably, yung ginagawa natin ay yung ginawa na natin before. Pero sigurado ba tayo na yung galaw or yung balanse ng kapangyarihan ay ganun pa rin sa kasalukuyan? Diba? Hindi ba na parang kapag bago na yung kondisyon ng panahon, bago na yung circumstances na meron tayo, hindi ba kailangan natin mag-adapt? At yun yung isa natin kailangan tingnan. So, that's for the main. But we have other reactors as well. So for our following reactor, maybe call on. Okay. Maybe call on Professor Emeritus Teresa S. Encarnacion Tadem of the Department of Political Science, College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, UP Diliman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Antoinette, the Third Study Center, and Sarilaya for sponsoring this and for everyone for coming. Dr. Antoinette Raquiza problematizes the ineffectiveness of the anti-corruption campaigns in the Philippines as epitomized by her 2 case studies, that is the ouster of President Joseph Estrada and what is referred to as People Power 2 or EDSA 2, and the anti-corruption campaigns against President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. She argues that the configuration of state power delimits the effectiveness of the anti-corruption measures and campaigns targeting national political figures. She expounds on this by saying that in the Philippines,
Political power is organized around and regarded as an entitlement by individual politicians whose rise to national prominence is a function of their family's social status and wealth instead of their membership in state institutions or political parties, an institutional setting which she calls proprietary polity. Because of this institutional setting, Antoinette points out that the anti-corruption campaigns themselves assume a personalistic character instead of contributing to the establishment of institutional reforms. Such campaigns become vulnerable to cooptation by political elites who are likely to use them to further their own personal political agendas. From a proprietary polity perspective, the need to address the adverse effects of neo-patrimonial rules in general and to curb corruption in high places. She argues that there is a need to institute institutional constraints on the executive power at every level of governance. In this light, she adds that it is pertinent to set up enduring alliances that would push for institutional reforms, including the building of political parties. I partially agree with Antoinette here, but I would, however, want to go beyond just institutional reforms. Institutional reforms are, yes, very important, but for me, it's just a first step addressing the adverse effects of the patrimonial state, which stymies the anti-corruption campaigns, and for that matter, campaigns which seeks to bring about a more unjust, humane societies. My points are the following. The institutional reforms which she talks about seems to be at the level of reforming the government, at the political level, and not the socioeconomic factors which have led to inequality. There is mention of it, but it's like, how do you prioritize this for the institutional reforms, which have allowed political economic elites, that is political dynasties, and or oligarchies to persist in Philippine society? Yes, institutional reforms are important, but it is just a first step, as it does not address the socioeconomic inequality that exacerbates the class divide, which actually Antoinette mentions, which has enabled corruption to run unabated. How can institutional reforms be put in place, such as the anti-political dynasty bill, which will never pass because more than majority of the members of Congress, 70%, are members of political dynasties? Maybe Antoinette can break down what type of institutional reform she envisions. From her paper, what strikes me is it is at the level of political, definitely not about good governance, but it does not include the enactment of socioeconomic policies which aims to redistribute wealth in the Philippines. And maybe, as Dominic said, we're up on the technocrats. She says, Antoinette says, yes, insulate the technocrats, but I wouldn't want to insulate technocrats who have neoliberal policies because they're not redistributive. I will insulate a Boy Morales type of technocrat, which targets the marginalized. So that has to be clear. Antoinette also, maybe it will help if she states the ideological paradigm by which institutional reforms can be implemented, and maybe it's important to spell this out. This is because institutional reforms which are under the rubric of the liberal democratic framework are limited. That is, such a framework assumes that everyone has equal access to opportunity, whether in the political and economic. But this is not the reality. People do not have equal access because of inequality. The anti-corruption campaign falls neatly into this category. The call is just to minimize and or manage corruption within the system. But how does this empower the majority of the population, especially the working class? This may not be possible if one has a class divide whereby less than 1% have the advantage in playing the field and the rest cannot, the urban and rural poor. That is, there's an equal access to opportunity, yes, but only a few can partake of that opportunity. That is, those who are already politically and economically empowered compared to those who are not. As noted within Asia, the latest World Bank data show that the Philippines has the highest level of inequality, which is 42.3 on the Gini index, whereby 50 of the richest Filipinos own 120 billion US dollars, that is 7.2 trillion pesos in 2020, a staggering 37%, more than one-third of the country's gross domestic product. To address this, therefore, it is not regime change, but for systemic and structural change. And this is not part of the conversation of the liberal democratic paradigm. The structural functional approach, which Antoinette criticizes, and rightly so, actually falls under this liberal democratic framework. That is, there's no problem with the system, it just needs fixing. The same with social movements theory, which Antoinette has elucidated. Like the structural functional approach, political process theory of social movements, which includes political opportunity structures such as elite cleavages, which Antoinette mentions in her paper, resource mobilization and framing fall under the liberal democratic perspective. I have used this social movements theory in my writings on this topic, but also keeping in mind where it falls short in explaining a political phenomena like the anti-corruption movement. That is, it is ahistorical and does not address the class divide. In the Anticorruption Chapter in the Third World Studies Center book on Global Civil Society Movement, published by Lexington Press in 2009, it notes that the anti-corruption campaigns are viewed as a middle-class activity that is reformist, which I think Antoinette also refers to. And the anti-corruption campaigns calls for political change, and Antoinette calls for institutional reforms as a solution. But I see importance of the need for the socio-economic restructuring of society, which, as pointed out by Kevin Lewison and Jean Glassman in their 2025 UPCIDES program on alternative development monograph on class, economy, and politics in Southeast Asia, has to deal with the configuration of struggles over social and economic power. Thus, there is a need to address this ideological paradigm shift away from liberal democracy and one that will address inequality and the class divide. Antoinette points out in her conclusion on the need to strengthen political parties to push for these institutional reforms. I will not say just any political party. Antoinette mentions pro-poor party, but it should be political parties which bring forth an ideological shift away from liberal democracy. In Europe and elsewhere in the world, Latin America, such as Latin America, this ideological shift from liberal democracy is carried out by left-wing and socialist movements. Recently, the US, the bastion of capitalism, saw the rise of the popular Bernie Sanders, bannering the socialist agenda of addressing corporate greed and gross white inequality and the disappearing middle class, as well as the emergence of Sanders, Democratic Socialist of America, where the next likely mayor of New York City, Zoran Mandani, will come from. This is therefore the challenge to social movements, that is, those identified with left formations, that is the mainstream left, the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the non-mainstream left, that is Social Democrats, Democratic Socialists, and Independent Socialists, among others, who have used the electoral arena offering an alternative vision of society that is not couched under the liberal democratic framework, but one that addresses the need to bring about structural changes and not just reforms through redistributive socioeconomic policies. But left movements and parties generally continue to shy away from this. As Democratic Socialist Pandayan chairperson Fernando Aldabo pointed out, projecting left-identified programs and personalities may lessen the possibility of throwing in non-ideological forces. Aldaba, I think Antoinette also kind of refers to this position, characterizes the left strategy and the anti-corruption campaigns in particular, and electoral campaigns in general. That is, allying with the conservative reformist forces in society and traditional politicians, as well as the socio-economic elites, who at the end of the day, as Antoinette points out, co-ops the campaigns and preserves and continues the status quo. That is, its hegemony over the rest of Philippine society. In conclusion, as articulated by the late Marxist scholar Francisco Dodon de Menso in 1996, the new party should make itself distinguishable from traditional parties by ensuring that socialist ideals are embodied in its programs and policies. Otherwise, there is no point in building it.
Maraming salamat po, Ma'am Tessa. That's a very incisive input about what Ma'am Antoinette said. And I hope mamaya mabigyan ng paliwanag ni Ma'am Antoinette kung ano ba yung mga sagot niya regarding those questions. And now, to proceed with our program, we call on our last reactor for this afternoon, Attorney Nepomuceno Malaluan, convener of Right to Know Right Now Coalition.
Magandang hapon, salamat Antoinette for the invitation. There's some nostalgia coming to the UP in the lecture hall rather than just walking at the open. Dr. Raquiza's chapter, Anticorruption Campaigns, Regime Change, and the Proprietary Polity, explains why anti-corruption drives in the Philippines generate high political drama, but little institutional change. She introduces the idea of proprietary polity, in which political power is in effect treated as private property, anchored in families, wealth, and networks, rather than public institutions. In this setting, anti-corruption campaigns are easily co-opted into cyclical rather than transformative processes. They often serve to weaken rivals or renew elite legitimacy, not to reform the system itself. As shown in the Estrada and Macapagal-Arroyo cases, which examined under such a framework, anti-corruption campaigns can oust the president, but end up reproducing and even strengthening the same patronage logic under a new leadership. The analysis that she made was very prescient. The volume within which the chapter is included was published in 2019. And now, 6 years later, here we are finding ourselves confronting what appears to be another turn in the same cycle. And the conditions that Dr. Raquiza described, the personalization of power, the weakness of institutions, and the use of anti-corruption as a political weapon within the same proprietary polity are in full display. Once again, corruption has forced its way into public consciousness through scandal. And once again, government's response has been to promise cleansing through investigation, dashboards, and commissions. But if Dr. Raquiza is right, the real question is not just whether the corrupt will fall, but whether the system that breeds them will remain intact. The organization I co-convened, the Right to Know Right Now Coalition, I co-convened with Joy Chavez who is here and with veteran journalist Malaluan. We have undertaken a series of reports on the ongoing infrastructure corruption scandal beyond flood control. The objectives of the study are twofold of the series. First is to understand and to articulate the system of corruption across the budget cycle. And second, to identify specific culpable individuals and institutions as evidence will allow. We have so far released 6 reports in this continuing series, and my comments draw mainly from our findings and situate them within Dr. Raquiza's analytical framework. In report number 3, which we titled Crooks Incorporated at Philippines, Pushers, Enablers, Players Gaming the System in Ban, we established that actually each stage of the budget cycle, from budget preparation to authorization, execution, and accountability, embeds checks and balances from administrative policies and regulations, statutory rules, and even constitutional standards and safeguards to ensure efficiency, integrity, and accountability throughout the process. So if it's formal reforms, they're all there. We find, however, that in reality, the very actors entrusted to protect the systems are the ones waving it. In Filipino, we have an apt word for it, bantay sa lakay. Once those who are supposed to guard the process turn against it, all defenses are compromised. Based on admissions before the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee, independent reports by civil society and media organizations, initial findings by executive institutions themselves, and our own R2KRN's reports, the emerging picture is one of how the system was gained not by a single rogue contractor, not a lone corrupt official, but a network and syndicate of politicians, bureaucrats, contractors, and even auditors of the COA, including a sitting commissioner. This points to a nuance that distinguishes the present episode from the 2 previous episodes that Dr. Raquiza compared. The system is now fully exposed, and there is no single factional target for the cycle to exploit. In earlier episodes, corruption scandals could be confined to a regime or to a political rival, allowing the system to reset itself under a new leadership. This time, the evidence implicates actors and institutions across the board, the corrosion being both vertical, and horizontal. The proprietary polity has lost its pretense of internal counterbalance. In truth, it sustained itself through pollution rather than competition among the elites. The danger in this situation, however, is for progressive anti-corruption forces to fall into the same trap that defined earlier cycles. The exposure of systemic corruption fuels public anger and demands for swift accountability. But the complexity and scale of the present scheme requires both persistence and precision. I see no fast break route to justice. Yet neither can we afford paralysis or overcaution. What is needed is a duality in tactics, combining a disciplined, evidence-based approach to case building with sustained public mobilization that keeps pressure on institutions and prevents the issue from being buried by political compromise. In the past, moral outrage often slid into factional politics. Movements became entangled in elite rivalries while institutions remained unreformed and even worsened in impunity as we see now. The imperative, I believe, is not to suppress the outrage, but to anchor it in a clear understanding of how the system operates and who must be held to account. This balance may prevent a repeat of past cycles where anti-corruption became the weapon of unreformed elite succession. In other words, this may be the unique opportunity that the present situation offers. If we are to break the cycle of proprietary polity, I believe that we need no less than a contemporary revolution that reorders political power and public resources. The corruption we now confront is not episodic, it is systemic, and undoing it requires rethinking how the state is constituted, how accountability is operationalized, and how sovereign power by the people is asserted effectively. Difficult as the challenge is, I would even add that this contemporary revolution cannot be confined to governance alone, similar to what Dr. Tadem said. Corruption is only one part of the story, the other is a failed economic policy framework. The two parts coexist, reinforce each other, and must both be confronted. The economic aspect, however, deserves a separate, probably deeper discussion. For now, our immediate task is to ensure that the present reckoning does not dissipate into another cycle, but becomes the opening for a long overdue purging and democratic reconstruction of our public institutions.
Maraming salamat po, Sir Nepo. So, given marami tayong mga katanungan na nire-raise na ating mga reactor at hindi maaari na kailangan natin nagpas ng mga ito, binibigyan po natin ng panahon si Antoinette to respond to these reactions. Or gusto niyo po sa ako kasi English.
First of all, I am very happy with all the reactions. Because you're actually extending the conversation, right? Because again, my talk is really about learning from the past. And so in that sense, it's a comparative analysis that tries to draw what are the factors, but those factors are actually going to change moving forward. So I am again thankful that first you really took the effort to read the chat. I know. And second, okay, so let me first go. What is the difference between? And I think this is a kind of running question among the three. What is the difference? Yung Ramos, yung Centennial Expo Filipino project sa Proprietary Polity, doon linabas yung textbook. Okay? What are the other? So there was that, and then we have Gintong Ani, and then we have PCSO, and then we also have it today. In other words, we are really using political, yung mga nakukuha natin sa mga agencies to fund yung mga electoral campaigns ng our allies. Okay. That's why, in a sense, this makes it an endemic, right? Kasi kumbaga, hindi mananalo yung whoever is fighting corruption kasi lahat ng nanalo dyan, medyo may kita doon sa corruption that happened for the elections. Ngayon, given that there are no more political parties, and so now we're just looking at sino-sino ba yan, right? So, hindi na nakafocus ngayon on the election. It's focused all throughout the national budget process, right? Because there will always be issues na kailangan ng support ng PBBM and his colleagues, right? So I am actually amazed that nobody is saying, you know what, itong national budget na to, kay PBM yan. No one's holding him accountable. And here he is, di ba? He appoints Remulla as ombudsman. Nobody's saying anything. Right? We're all talking about, the ICI, dapat, independent, dapat ganito, dapat ganito. You know who's going to decide on the ICI cases? Remulla. Because Remulla as ombudsman is the one that's going to recommend to the Sandigan Bayan who is going to be trying. No one is talking about that. We're talking about what? Nepotism peace. We're talking about lifestyle change or lifestyle check, right? Pero we're not looking at, so kumbaga, we are looking at yung mga nakikita natin. No one is providing a counter narrative. No one is providing a counter-hegemonic narrative that will actually dispel lahat ng kasinungalingan ni BBM. So in a way, that's why I'm so, natutuwa ako na ngayon meron tayong ganitong discussion. Because then we have to really look at how do we want to pursue anti-corruption. Sara Duterte, okay. In the beginning, parang sabi ko sa sarili ko, I will not go there. Mainly because at this point in time, lahat ng usapan are you pro-Duterte or anti-BBM. Tapos pag nagsabi ka Duterte ka, everything else that you say is cancelled. If you, for instance, say, no, I'm pro-BBM, then everything that you say about Duterte. So in other words, I do not understand na lumiit yung ating mundo. Na all of a sudden, wala nang relevance yung iba nating mga issues. It all boils down to BBM or Sara Duterte. I even saw, the most dangerous enemy that we have today is Sara Duterte. Okay, then you will say, nako, pro-Duterte itong tao na to. Right? Because again, it's like, so I do hope that we get out of that kind of straitjacket mindset. Kasi they get away with it. As I always, and I said this in one forum, we do not have a stake sa awayan ng mga naghaharing uri. We do not have a stake. Right? What we have a stake on is really who is our constituency. So I do not understand, like when we go into yung bagay, yung Duterte, let's go to issues. Okay, so this is where I will go to so yung tanong ni is Sara Duterte a spent force? No, but she is not. She is not in power right now. right? Who is in power and who is calling the shots? It's not Duterte. Take out Duterte, nandiyan pa rin yung ano. Katungkalian sa Congress. Hindi mawawala yan. Diba? So we bring out Duterte, we bring out Sara Duterte. Okay, we're happy, and then what? What's next? Yung sinasabi, so I don't think Sara Duterte is a factor right now. Okay? She's popular, but she's even so quiet right now. Hindi mo nga naririnig. Diba? So I don't know why we're trying to build her up. Na she's so powerful, dapat ang katakutan natin is Sara Duterte. Right? Yung tanong ni Tessa. Okay. Can we go? Yeah. Okay. Dito ko lang sasabihin kasi when I talk about institutional reforms, I mean institutions in a very broad sense, right? Culture is institution. Family is an institution. It's in a very broad sense. Pero, dito, sinabi ko dito, anchor anti-corruption campaigns as part of a comprehensive critique of oligarchic democracy. Kasi at this point, hindi ko pa sinasabi, or I have another topic. On the economic side, privatizing governance, which I did in the Asian Center, but it's correct, it's oligarchic democracy. That is the problem natin ngayon. Right? Yung kumbaga, but oligarchic democracy will present itself in institutions. It mediates. Institution mediates political power. And so you look for those institutions where they are promoted and sustained and reinforced. And this is where we're going to, is that institutional reform, because these are institutions that reproduce inequality, that reproduces injustice. Okay. So, ang sinabi ko lang dito, so first word for the, but this is the one that I'm looking at. Transform elections as a platform for pro-poor advocacies. Okay, what does that actually mean? Ang sinasabi ko dyan, we have to, and for the pro-poor, this is where the pro-poor agenda comes in. Instead of looking at elections as a way to win elections, kasi again, tama si Tessa, policies themselves in this system will be rapid, right? It's implicated sa the proprietary polity. Any policies, party list, diba? Any policies that we come out with will be co-opted. So the thing is, for us to not to take too seriously that we have to win. Kasi si manalo tayo, co-op tayo. Although of course we want to win. Pero, ang sinasabi ko is we need to use it as a platform. Diyan natin ilabas yung issues ng mga mahihirap. Wealth tax. Yung sinasabi ni Tessa, what's our social reform agenda? Or ang sinasabi ni Nepo, what is our contemporary revolution? I like that word. Our contemporary revolution agenda. Diba? So when I say platform here, I'm saying, alam nyo, kung gusto nyo gamitin yung election, let's do it, let's use it. Pero huwag natin itago yung issues ng masa. And I've heard that before, may mga hindi to winnable. Hindi to winnable issue, kaya huwag na natin muna dali. Sa feeling ko, teka muna, ano ibig sabihin ng hindi winnable? Wealth tax is one. Right? So again, ang nawawala yung pro-poor agenda. So this is where, I can go into, sinabi ni yung, I totally agree. Actually, I totally agree also with Tessa. In some, I'm telling her na nga, i-recruit ko na siya. Kasi naghahanap siya ng ideology. Mag-usap tayo later. Kay Nepo, thank you so much, Nepo. And I really made it a point to invite Nepo kasi they are the ones in the trenches as far as, you know, what is happening. They're making the research, yung right to know right now. And I'm very happy to yun nga. So what are the things? One is dapat yung political and economic should be go hand in hand. Which is also what Nepo mentioned, right? And then which is also what Teresa mentioned, which addresses inequality in the country. So again, yung proprietary polity, that just I'm going to cut myself. Yung proprietary polity, I know, mahirap sabihin. Yung proprietary yung paninindigan yung proprietary polity. Anyway, yung concept na yun, it is just a framework. It is not, as framework goes, it does not, you know, like, ito na yun, and this is your interpretation of reality. It's a guide to interpreting reality and not the reality itself. Okay. Second, ano ko lang is, let us build a counter narrative on corruption. Kasi kailangan natin to get away with it. Kasi walang nakatungtong sa ano ba talaga yung problema natin. At ano talaga, sino talaga ang kailangan singilin. It's PBF. It's this administration. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Hindi po Ma'am Caouette. So, at this juncture, we will now be proceeding to our open forum. So, para po maayos yung flow ng ating discussion, we will first be entertaining questions. So, kailangan po muna natin magtanong. So, ang mangyayari po dito ay we have two microphones at both sides of the auditorium. We will be first entertaining the first three questions. Okay, so if ever na may tanong po kayo, please go to the mic nearest to you. And when you do ask your question, please state your name, your affiliation, and to whom the question is addressed to. Pa-press po nung button sa ilalim ng mic, long press. Press po.
My question is for Doctor. I'm Bea from the International. So my question is to what extent the blame is on BDM, because people don't want Sarah the Terry president. The simplest call is usually resign for the president. But there's apprehension in calling for resignation because the Duterte years were quite turbulent. So there's that strong force within the discourse with not calling for resignation, such that we do fall into the narrative of just blaming the budget process and not the people who actually have the power.
Okay, to reiterate, the question is directed to Ma'am Antoinette, and the question is, to what extent should we put the blame on DDM?
I think 100%. Sorry, I think 100%. Bakit? Why are we excusing him? Because we're afraid of, well, of course I understand yung the Sara Duterte. But then we cannot not hold people accountable because of our fears. That's let's go first. Ano ba talaga yung totoo? Diba? Kasi if we start deciding on, teka muna, this is kaya nila yung succession, diba? That's why I think also mahihirapan tayong palitan to because of the Sara Duterte question. But that doesn't mean that we should not hold BBM accountable. Parang already, kumbaga nandito pa lang tayo sa step 1, nasa step 5 na tayo. Right? So if there's no need at this point to say, nako kasi ganito, dapat pa si Sara Duterte na. It doesn't necessarily have to fall that way. It will again depend on us, right? So ang ano ko lang is like, we take it first, ano ba talaga, for this specific national budget corruption, hindi pwedeng hindi natin i-hold accountable si PBM kasi siya yung pumirma. Diba? Siya yung pumirma ng yung kanyang speaker. Tapos yung dati niyang na si Escudero na dati rin niyang loyalist. And then, at the end of the day, si PBM ang pumirma. So we cannot say at this point, kasi Sara Duterte. Right? Let's hit Sara Duterte, but let's also, right now, put the main blame to PBM.
Maraming salamat po. For our next question,
Hi, I'm Brown Castillo, undergrad in the Department of Anthropology. My question is, actually, not just for Dr. Raquiza, pero if anyone can answer naman po. I wonder po what you would think about a conception of our system of proprietary polity. Patrimonial politics is merely a means by which the capitalist and the political class fulfill the same social role of reproducing our system of profit extraction, exploitation, and capital valorization. I personally don't think every capitalist is evil or morally bankrupt, or even each and every politician and legislator. But by maintaining the means of reproducing their class position, they reproduce this state of injustice, corruption, and alienation within the broader capitalist system. So, parang if we end up, it's sort of connected to the first question. Parang if we end up really pinning 100% of the blame on BDM rather than the capitalist system as a whole, we end up falling into this specific trap of personalization of the entire thing. I'm just asking what your personal opinion of that is.
Yes. Yes. I think that's why it's tama yung
mga personalities, but yung setting niya what under yung systemic it's not even regime it's a systemic. So tama yun kasi as this system can produce another Bongbong, another Duterte. That's why my question really comes is bakit ang hina ng social movements, left movement to seize the moment? Diba? So it becomes a debate between these two and there's no alternative being offered. Diba? Because they don't say it. They don't say the alternative. So wala kang mapipili talaga.
Also, I think one of the key issues in the debate now is that ang kwarta ginagasto is money of the people. It's for people's money. These are taxes that we're collecting, and this is sometimes put away, and that emphasis enough that so the accounting, the government and BPM is accountable. They say they're accountable to people who pay taxes. So I think the approach that was mentioned by Nepo, the idea of going project by project is a way you keep pushing Dominic accountability on specific issues, and then you do the resource, and you can mobilize on specific issues. And sometimes this is better because the idea of a grand narrative is a good way to distract people and makes people away from the actual fights on taxes that are paid by people.
Now, I think this is where the point that I'm trying to make of not seeing a fast break of justice to this. In fact, the missing ingredients that Dr. Caouette, for example, was pointing out, clear succession, the president himself not being targeted. To me, it may be actually the embodiment of the opportunity that is before us. Because it's so easy, as I was cautioning, to fall into the trap of instant justice and having a specific target, Polis before or era before, precisely is what allows factions within the elite to hijack the anti-corruption movement. So, but that doesn't mean that that you lose the momentum by being methodical about this. But I think both. That's why I was talking about the duality in the tactics that is needed. And part of that, kung naiintindihan man natin rhetorically what's wrong with the system, hindi yun naiintindihan minsan sa ground that we purport to speak for. And therefore, we have to show. For example, right now, I don't think anyone here can distinguish with precision between an insertion and an amendment, for example. What makes an insertion not an amendment and an amendment not an insertion when they happen in exactly the same procedural step, for example. So, those things need careful study and explanation, especially because the institutions of accountability are captured, as you mentioned. Who else will show? If we say, well, the ombudsman should show, the Constitution says this, we all know that, but in other words, we're looking, COA should show. But who in COA? And the wife of the COA commissioner is a contractor. Who in BBM allow this, for example, these insertions to happen? So who are we asking to act on our behalf? And so we need to do our work and not just say down with all of you, because that doesn't work.
Hello, yeah. Thank you. So, ako naman, ang aking approach is both you need to see the interaction between agency and structure, right? So in other words, you're looking at, okay, capitalism as a structure, but there's also agency. Who are the ones protecting, preserving that system, right? So so you need to link the two. Hindi pwedeng capitalism, pero at the end of the day, sino ba yan? Actually, so it's economics. But anyway, ang problema is that sino nagpapayaman? At the end of the day, it's going to be the state. When you look at capitalism, the class, diba? Ang question mo, how are they able to pursue capital accumulation, wealth accumulation? That's the state. Kaya yung sinasabi ni Teresa na neoliberal, miski neoliberal yan, yung state ang nagpro-promote ng neoliberalism. For instance, and then this I gave in a talk, and because I also worked on it, which is yung mga ating oligarchs right now, right? Yung mga PPP, public-private partnerships. Right now, we have a private sector advisory council that meets, and these are composed of the 10 richest Filipinos, that meet with BBM in the cabinet, in Malacanang, and then ang sinabi niya sa appointee say, pinagmamalaki niya, you know what, we meet twice a month with the president. And they meet twice a month with the president, kasama dyan yung cabinet. It's a shadow cabinet. Right? It's a shadow cabinet. Imagine, and they are not even elected. Pero they're deciding on, minimum wage. They are deciding on, ano yung mga, ito mga flood control. So, kumbaga, meron rin katumbas yan sa economic sphere. But it is true that we have to criticize capitalism. But the question is, who is right now in this? Sino yung namamahala dyan sa sistema na yan today? It's BBM, sorry, and his crew and his oligarch friends. Right? Ngayon lahat, pag tinanong mo lahat, nandiyan yung NAIA is run by, Ramon Am. Water, electricity, infrastructure. So again, we have to look at the agency also, while linking it up to the structure.
Thank you both. So, we've exhausted 2 questions. Do we have another question from the crowd? Yes, let's proceed to the mic.
So, good afternoon po. I am host Vitabor, a senior high school student from St. Bernadette College of Valenzuela. So, there was a statement earlier which is, there's no problem with the system, it just needs fixing. So, my question is, how are you going to fix the system given that some of the leaders holding office now and handling it are almost the same with politicians before who bends the laws and are corrupt themselves? So, I think, thank you.
To whom is the question directed? Okay. Gusto po ba maunang sumagot?
And then systemic is a problem. It's the problem, right? You were saying it's not the problem. No. For me, it doesn't need just fixing. It just needs a change. It's some structural change, which goes with the paradigm and all.
Princess?
Also, I think the circle changes, passes. It's like what the Chen was saying. It's embodied in the individual. So there's a 2 sense that I think part of what it's key is public education literacy, because people get upset and it's a share upset because you said, is this money that it's our money that you took over? But at the same time, it's easy to fall in the trap of identifying one person as you were explaining, and then you replace a person. That's it. I think what you're pointing out is key. It's like it's ingrained in the way the system is made, the institution, and these institutions are complex to understand, but they can be understood. So oftentimes people would rather identify one person. It's good on TV and social media, but it doesn't get to if that person represents something much bigger, and that's where we should emphasize. Maybe use case study and show this family and how they built up, but they embody what the system is, and then you have to get at it, but you have to explain it, because if you only focus on the individual, then it becomes, you remove the case, it's like you kill one mosquito, but there will be 10 other mosquitoes coming after, so why are there mosquitoes there?
One Princess.
It's a very interesting question. Okay, even as far back as the martial law, there were those who were critical that the target of attack was on Marcos, such an anti-Marcos campaign. Anyway, ang hirap, no? We keep on focusing on personalities, on the people, on the town. That going back to the present, I'm just wondering, kasi in the past, with the EDSA uprising, the military figured. It was a role for the military, even with the change of era or this ouster, the military again, that are role there. And even now, there are rumors of talks of where the military is. When we're looking at the challenge to the system, we look to the social movements, to the politicized elements, to the political movements, but we all know how weak the movements, political, social movements are. And even the social movements are hate into this pro-Duterte and pro-Marcos and so on. So that weakens, that challenge. But what about the military? There's talk of that, speculation, and we don't know what's happening.
Meron po bang may response from the panel?
Sige. So I don't have any inside information, unfortunately. I wish I did. But wala. But studies on the military, and I think some conversations with some members of the military, ang key is the leadership. Key, kaya dito sa discussion natin ngayon, when we look at the military, it was Angel Reyes, the general. Kasi in terms of how they are organized, it's a hierarchical, centralized. So yung mga Magdalo soldiers that were in fact middle rank sila. And did not even kung meron silang ganong lakas and backed up by the social movements. I know. Even when there was that episode, nothing happened. Diba? So we do need, it's really the leadership that's going to be, and then with the leadership, may iba-iba pang klaseng leadership, may personalistic leadership, may institutional leadership. Unfortunately, I don't think we have institutional leadership that would say, okay, dapat, well, fortunately or unfortunately. Parang, ito na, kailangan, we have to say something para sa bayan. I don't know if that's ever going to come from, unfortunately, except for the West Philippines. So I don't know, I understand, as far as the military is concerned.
I was just thinking the fact that BBM changes, diba? Pinapalitan niya. And even Sara. So I think it's still a civilian. The whole tao. So, I think that. So medyo, and also they're not monolithic. I mean, as compared to martial law time, na mas solid sila.
Parang hindi ko unawaan kung parang ang hinahanap natin ay repeat nung cycle na binanggit ni Dr. Raquiza that hopefully ends in a regime change, for example. When we already know, as her evidence shows, that it does not represent change. And often it is hijacked by precisely the proprietary polity. I think what we should look for is how will it be different this time around. and that's why I really cannot understand why we're trying to look at the forces within the proprietary polity moving one way or the other and hoping for some rupture within to be changed by what and for who. So, and I think time is something that we need to stretch a bit because, as I mentioned, there's no quick fix around, especially if we're talking about fundamental change. I don't think some General Torre will give it to us or some whoever or some Trillanes will give it to us or some Sara Duterte or some BBM or if we're looking for someone who says down with BBM, then probably we should listen to Governor Chavit Singson. They say all the probably good things in relation to that narrative of change. But who is he and what does he represent? O sina Erice or because we're looking to exactly the same proprietary polity to bring the change for us. That's repeating a third in the cycle that Dr. Raquiza precisely presented to us. That's my difficulty in framing the situation now. I really feel that we should see this as an opportunity to not for a quick fix, but to to look for something else. That's what I'm trying to think about. And I think this opportunity might not present itself again because this is but I think we should also look at our time horizon. Like for example, 2028 is an election. That's a democratic process that will happen. If you're going to do an equation of what's good from the perspective of the public, is it an instant change now captured by whoever versus really preparing our forces to matter in the next elections? I mean, I think it's difficult to look at the same proprietary polity for answers. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. Thank you.
I think the point you're making is quite good. We haven't heard so much about scandal or mismanagement of fund with the military, but it would be if someone wants to do a thesis or speak, it'd be very interesting because it's not because as if the military were isolated. Plus, there's more money coming because of the new geopolitics. Like American is back, like Western countries are going to be funded. So it'd be very interesting to track down the money as well on the military because what happened is some junior officer, a medium level officer were disgruntled. They joined because they realized that the top notch were getting a lot of advantages. So I think that's part of following them. Tracking the money would be also asking for accountability because that would create dissent within the force itself.
Okay, I just have a short, maybe we'll have to call back. So, okay. Tingin ko, it's true, we have to have a long-term horizon. Long-time horizon. Hindi pwede yung, but that long-time horizon pwede natin tingnan in 2020. It's a major point. And this is the reason why I'm advocating for a political party, a strong, pro-poor, independent political party. It's because a political party is set up to contest the state. It's a state, it's not civil society, it's not a development NGO, it's a political party really is something that should be aggregating interests of your constituency, coming up with platforms for for reforms. So it is, whether it's going to win or not, it's going to contest political power. Kaya political party ang ano ko. If you're going to organize anything, it has to be a political party. Can I recall that kay Pat?
Magandang hapon po, si Pat Gonzales sa Sarilaya. Naglalaka ko kanina doon sa, parang iniisip ko lang, tungkol doon sa for Duterte ba o for Marcos. Pero siguro, following ni tungkol sa engagement kasi yung tinatawag niya na yung kailangan long battle long war. Pero sa tactical frame, kahit ngayon, pareho naman talagang corrupt yung dalawa, di ba? Yung dalawang nagko-compete na si Marcos at si Duterte. Pero siguro, ang pwedeng talagang kailangan evidence-based pa rin ang mga struggles because there's tactics and there's strategy. So your tactics must be based on the current situation, the evidence is there na nakukuha mo para malabanan yung corruption by the different variations of the governance. Saka yung presidente at vice-presidente. Kasi sa budget, sa corruption ngayon, hindi na naman talaga Duterte yan. Pero malalim ang Duterte roots. Yung roots of the corruption, pero Duterte yun, di ba? Malalim yan. Kasi masagal na, niloko tayo Duterte regime ang daming alulong ginawa sa atin. Not only in terms of corruption and money, in terms of rights, human rights. Kasi, so, talaga malaki na sa amin. Kailangan tibunyag yan at tanggapin ng mamamayan na masama si Duterte. Ibinigay natin sa di ba ganitang lugar, ang bayan natin Duterte. Pero hindi rin pwede sabihin, wala kasalanan ng mga Marcos. Kasi malalim din ang kasaysayan nila na pag-Marcos, sabi lalo na sabay lang yan, pareho lang sila ng bilang na pinapatay, nakulong. So, pero pag nasa tactical level tayo, lumawa corruption. Maraming involved sa flood control. Tapos hindi mo mali pa kay Marcos. Although I think there should be. If you can find evidence, may iba. Pero sa budget, meron. Kasi yung 25 budget, the most corrupt budget. Sino kumira nun? Marcos. Diba? So, you just use sino ang nalaban on the budget? Sino ang nalaban on the flood control program? Sino ang nalaban on getting the PhilHealth funds for PhilHealth? Ang problema nun, maraming laban. Kaya maraming dapat organisahin ng tao para makalaban sa iba't ibang fronts. Para lumabas yung doon din lalabas kung sino ang pwedeng nanulo, sino ang magtuyo ng partido. Kasi kung ang partido natin, puro mawalan tayo ng bawal may laban kay Duterte, kay Marcos, wala tayong partido. So we have to get out from the cases and from what our analysis, kung ano ba talaga yung agenda natin, what we push for. Parang ganun lang.
Maraming salamat po. Proceed with our open forum. We can still entertain 3 more questions. So, kindly please raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, tapos 3. If we still have time after these 3 questions, you can still entertain. Okay, so first muna po siya, then we can have Taka, then the one in front.
Ano? Okay. Benji. Okay, brief lang ito ha. It is great to be here. To listen to these very knowledgeable speakers with excellent suggestions. It's also great to be here. You know, 50 years ago, half a century ago, we were here organizing and educating UP students almost every week. That was during the height of the Vietnam War and under the Marcos regime, that the regime of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Mula UP, pumunta na kami sa University Belt hanggang nationwide, every major college and university nationwide would be involved in the 10-point program of the NDF, which I feel is deficient for our youth now. Na involved ang maraming student leaders and writers nationwide against the oppressive and corrupt regime of Ferdinand Marcos. Now, ngayon, as the speaker say, kailangan ng political movement again that would have the political will of the people and would build, gusto ko na sabihin ito ha, a socialist-oriented government. At least we should have a progressive government that is people-centered. Na may clear narrative, agenda, and vision that will be spread nationwide, like the NDF program before. Tama yung sinabi niyo lahat. And I want to thank you.
It's very apparent na yung support mula sa mga kaisipan natin ay there has to be this collective group or agenda, and which is particularly alternative from what we have right now. And sige, we have one question from over there, so please proceed to the mic.
Yeah.
Sige, before you
I'm sorry,
ask your question.
that's so possible with pro-poor party. Kasi we're not divided. Dami dyan eh, di ba? So I think it really has to be something more concrete. If you say socialist, that's clear. Inequality is clear. Because even the traditional politicians will say they're pro-poor. But no one will say they are for.
No, so yeah. What I'm not going into ideology right now, right? I'm just saying we need a political party that will embrace yung the poor in whatever form, okay? So that's why I don't want to go into a question of like ideology at this point. Although syempre, I can identify. But then for me, I want a political party that's broad. Right? So ang ating basis is not necessarily socialism, because again, that will limit our. So I do not think that you can have a cadre party. But what I am really advocating is a broad democratic party. That pag-usapan natin yung ideology, right? Pero I'm not gonna impose. Siyempre, meron akong sariling but I do not want to start there. Because let us start sa ating reading sa Philippine realities and what we need right now. Later na natin pag-usapan, di ba? Like, if you're socialist, and you can be socialist in that party, that big tent, what we need is a big tent party. So the socialists can be there, we can fight and struggle and debate our agenda. But we need a big tent party. Can it be left formations? Because left covers all different listeners, di ba? But ang problema ko lang sa left formation is it limits. Alam mo, ganito. Kasi yung mga left formation ngayon, parang why am I not joining any left formation? So, ang ano ko lang is, I don't wanna go into whether, so, it can be left, di ba? Kasi, talaga, I'm for structural change. So, ang ano is, I don't, like, parang at this point lang ha, ayoko muna mag-label. That's left or socialist or ano, let's just magbuo tayo ng isang partido. Right? That will embrace yung mga mahihirap. So, if you don't like pro-poor, because everybody's saying pro-poor but not doing it, I don't care. I would say pro-poor. Diba? So, yun lang yung muna yung ano natin. Mamaya na natin pag-usapan yung strategy ito.
Okay, so we called individual over here, so let's first go with that question. And then po, okay,
Like this. Yeah. So, gandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. Kaya na po medyo kabata kasi lamig pala dito. So, my name is Chen po from Rizal Technological University, a political science student. Now, for the background na po, for the context na, I have been reading, kasi since we are talking about corruption, I have this reading so-called 1,000 Years of Corruption, History of Corruption, and Anticorruption in the Philippines since 1945 by Garrido to 2025. Now, this is a very interesting reading po kasi it talks about anti-corruption fundamentalism, which means it rejects corruption politically, leading it to vulnerabilities on paano ko to sabihin? Parang gigibawin natin yung ating soberanya or ating democracy. Ayun ang highlight ng author ko. At the same time, yung author ko highlight po niya is yung corruption movement po at yung anti-corruption, yung corruption scandal and anti-corruption movement is also dialogue or synthesis talaga sila. Lagi sila kasama throughout the years of in our history in our Philippines. No, my question is for Miss Miss Antoinette said yes, about po sa political parties so-called proper political party. Kasi po sa readings po it kind of doon sa readings po it kind of answer din po sa question po ni Ma'am Teresa. Bakit po mahina po yung social movement? Based po sa readings po nito, since marami po anti-movement corruption campaigns throughout since 1945, and nagkaroon ng major hall after Marcos Sr., no? Nagkaroon ng major governance pro, and then nag-stop lang po siya during Duterte campaign. Kasi ang topic po, based lang daw po sa readings ko po, ang topic daw po ng corruption na shift away from illegal drugs. Kasi dahil daw po sa frustration po ng mga masa po, dahil po sa paulit-ulit po ng corruption, kaya nagkaroon tayo ng anti-corruption fundamentalism. No? The question is, paano niyo po ma-convince po yung mga masa po for political party, knowing that most of the masses are frustrated na po sa anti-corruption and they are leading towards a strongman leader. And yung strongman leader na yung tawag na natin is demogag sa political side. So how do we convince them? And given that we are in politics, given that we are having a higher illiteracy rate and also lower information voters phenomenon. So that's for me.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a very good question. Kasi yung alienation ng mga mahirap, they don't, parang for them, lahat naman kayo corrupt eh. Diba? I mean, and it is so true. And that's what we're also saying, na lahat naman yung mga traditional politicians right now are corrupt. Right? I think the way to go, but again, this is an empirical question. The way to go is really to raise the issues. right? To carry their issues when you go and you know, we organize. So we go beyond yung corruption. Kasi it doesn't translate into their lives. Pag sinabi natin, alam mo, may ganito corruption, blah, 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 sasabihin, yung mga pagkain. Alam mo, wala akong pagkain, wala yung anak ko, hindi pumapasok. Yun yung mga issues nila. That's why we do corruption. It doesn't hit them in the bottom line, which is their existence. Right? So yung survival mode nila, hindi nahihit ng corruption issue. So I think the way to convince them is first to listen to them. Right? Regardless of whether they're BBM or Duterte. It's to listen to them. And then second is to get what their issues are and recruit them based on the issues that actually is important to the nation. So, yeah, kung you're, nag-recruit na ako. Sige. So, thank you so much for your question.
Right, sige po. For our next question po.
I just wanted to bring in another actor who is, which is quite a decisive factor in regime change, especially in the Philippines and other developing countries. And that's the role of the United States, the US. As we know, when EDSA 1 happened, some would actually call EDSA 1 for all its legitimate issue and the heroism that went into bringing down that government, the Marcos regime. Some call it an element of it being a colored revolution, that the CIA actually played a role in regime change, in bringing down Marcos, but facilitating the ascendance of a leader that was politically acceptable to the US and the West. And that they actually played a role in making sure that a less radical option would be viable. In fact, I remember in the writings regarding EDSA 1, Robin Broad, I think, mentioned that it is quite unusual to have these national capitalisms happening and bringing down a dictatorship, that there wasn't an anti-imperialist perspective as well that went into it. Bakit nakafocus lang kay Marcos and fascism, which in and of itself is great, but there were forces that were pushing for there were forces going beyond that. The left forces were pushing for anti-imperialist aspects as well to the struggle and not limiting it to fascism. And while there are arguments for and against, do we leave it to fascism because that's the broadest unity, it's very likely that the United States strengthened that trend of keeping the anti-imperialist perspective out of the anti-fascist struggle, so that the ascendance of an alternative would not hold an anti-imperialist perspective. And that issue, and so that I think it's so obvious that since then the US has been a player. They may not be overt, but we know they're there. And moving up to 2028, and ongoing geopolitics, and the formahan now in between China and the US, BRICS, and the West, the Philippines is a strategic player. And so again, the US was embrace, if you like, of the Philippines is that much more close, I would think. So how that plays in terms of regime change, in terms of 2028, I think a lot of reflection needs to come in, and we need to be more upfront about bringing in the role of the US in particular. CIA, US State Department, this isn't just in the books and in Netflix. It's actually playing out here. And I think we need to have more conversations around it.
Meron po ba ako or panel na gustong pag-add ng ipot?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So it goes without saying, if you're pro-poor, you're anti-imperialist, can you be there? No, but it's true. Diba? Parang, ano ba, diba? Siyempre, again, it's really, our system has been built on the US model. That, of course, is now really going into authoritarian rule right now, as we speak, right? So, the lie that the US gave us in terms of Western democracy is actually being exposed at this time. That basically the US is a banana republic. Unfortunately, okay. Ngayon, again, I think we do need, especially when we're talking about foreign policy, we do need an independent foreign policy, right? Na hindi nakakabit sa US, because in fact right now yung ating issues on survival, let's even move it up to a higher level, yung regional conflict, na talagang sa totoo lang, our leadership itataya yung buhay natin, right? Itinataya yung buhay natin, for instance, yung laban ng Taiwan and China, na wala naman tayong ginalaman doon. And yet, we will go to war for Taiwan. So, madali, and so there's that. But the second thing is, of course, yung sinasabi ni Meredith. But yeah. So I think it should be part of the conversation on how. But I will start with saying that as actually. First, look at ano ba yung national interest natin. Last na lang, I do believe yung sinasabi ni Meredith, when you look at different movements around the world, di ba na-oust si Lula, na-oust si Chavez, na-oust si Evo Morales, and if you look at the way it is being, even in Bangladesh, di ba? So parang, I do think there is a split. There is a hand that is part of yung ouster ng mga people, yung mga leaders that are fighting the US. And so there has to be that kind of a study there na
Just to add, I think I would call for a broad social movement. I think this is the key thing at the moment, and this is what I think young people wants to do. It's be active and mobilize. It's quite encouraging because 50 years was a very strong movement where it was led by young people, and then they start to move. And what you look around, the people, as I said at the beginning, they were pessimistic on the new Gen Z generation. But we're seeing now, and more, there's intersection, there's movement, talking to each other. It's not only it's a socio-economic issue, sovereignty, economic, ecological, feminist, identity-based. I mean, there is something happening in this society we should be building. A party is a higher form of institutionalizing collective action, but I think the moment now is for collective action, creating a new discourse and new spaces for broad movement.
2 points. Yung martial law time, the face of the US anti-dictatorship was the military bases and IMF World Bank. I know an IMF World Bank, but yung finance capital, which is actually ruling our economy, is actually more insidious kasi walang mukha. But that is the one that's bringing inequality within our society and worldwide. So yun, happy with that one. Maybe we can go into the proof. Kasi has the daming left formations, social movements, that are political parties na di ba? So maybe when Antoinette recruits me, well, anong pagkakaiba? Kasi anong dami sa Congress, di ba? Left formations, whether mainstream or non-left, nandiyan na they're all pro-poor, di ba? But nobody brings out, I need to say, inequality, socialism. So, it doesn't differentiate them from other parties because, as Antoinette also pointed in her paper, they still have to ally with traditional politicians. So that is a problem. So yeah.
Sige. So I think that's all the time that we have for today for that open forum. So before we end our program, maybe again, Antoinette, do you have any parting words to conclude our discussion for this afternoon?
Yeah, maraming salamat sa lahat ng dumating for this discussion, and then also Dominic and Teresa and Nepo. I think we if I may say so myself, I think we kind of elevated in discussion natin on corruption, which is what is needed right now, is to really, bring up the discussion. So we're really talking about system level. We're really looking at yung long-term perspective, and then even ideology comes in. I also believe in what Dominic mentioned, that we need to create and sustain this kind of spaces. So again, maraming salamat sa Third World Studies Center and sa Sarilaya for providing us this opportunity to discuss with you a problem that we all confront, but we are given pag sa media, we're given yung mga kwentong kutsero, I think. So hopefully we learn something from you, and we will in fact go and at least for this, yung sinasabi ni Nepo, we have this is an historic moment because it actually exposes the system. It actually exposes the system. Walang in-despair, no? Na sino yung mga nangungurakot. So, and then it's yun na. So, I hope you were able to take advantage and make some changes moving forward. Maraming salamat sa lahat.
You can give our title of our lecture for today as Anticorruption Campaigns and Regime Change. I think it's apparent to everyone that maybe the goal is not to change the regime, but actually to change the system. And given na nasa usapan na tayo ng pagbabago ng sistema, paano ayusin ang